This program is brought to you by newscliptv.com. Make your own news. Register online and become a Newsclip TV reporter. Newsclip TV, your community news website.
Welcome to Persistence Pays TV. I'm your host, Lori Roudnask. Have you ever felt yourself feeling tired when you're not in the sun, during the winter months, or if you live in a climate that has a lot of rain? Well, today on the show I've got Dr. Rona here, and he's the author of Vitamin D, the Sunshine Vitamin. So thanks for being here today, Dr. Rona.
My pleasure.
And you've also written 10 other books,
right.
So congratulations on that.
Well, thanks.
And I really was interested, a friend of mine was going through a rough time suffering from depression over the last 4 years, and I asked her, what has she been doing? And she said what she had been doing is taking vitamin D3. So I researched vitamin D3, and I found the article that was sent to her, and you were the doctor that was talking about vitamin D3, and I thought, I've got to know more. So thank you for coming in and talking to us about the importance of vitamin D in our diets.
Yes, vitamin D is incredibly important for your moods. There are receptors all throughout the body for vitamin D, and even in the brain. So it stands to reason if you do not feed those receptors that something bad will happen. Those receptors are there for a reason, and it's been found that people who are low in vitamin D end up feeling depressed, tired, their immune system goes down, they have more inflammation in their systems, they're more prone to infections and other illnesses. So vitamin D is important to keep the blood levels normal so that you feel a normal mood and normal immune system, normal energy.
Now, vitamin D, is vitamin D the same as vitamin D3, or are they a different?
Yes, when we talk about vitamin D, we talk about vitamin D3. Vitamin D2 is a vegetarian or a vegan form of vitamin D, whereas most vitamin D comes from animal sources. The supplemental forms of vitamin D. Actually, what happens is you make vitamin D under your skin through the action of sunlight. So it's a peculiar vitamin as opposed to other vitamins which you get from external sources or from food. Vitamin D is something that your body manufactures itself.
Ah, and when you say from the sun, if we put sunscreen on, what happens then?
Well, that's a big problem, and I think a lot of people should be warned about that if they use a lot of sunscreen, that they are probably going to end up vitamin D deficient, especially in the summertime, when that's really our only exposure to the sun here in Canada, and in certain parts of the world where there's not much sunshine, you just don't make vitamin D as you would in a place which is south of the equator or just north of the equator. So if you're close to the equator, then you make a lot of vitamin D, but if you're living up here in Ontario during the winter months, you're not going to make very much.
Right.
So if you use sunscreen, you basically block the body's ability to manufacture vitamin D from sunshine.
Wow. And sunscreen is so important, not so that you don't, I mean, if you're fair like I am, I burn, so I put sunscreen on. So that's a really good thing to know, that if you do use sunscreen, you really need to be taking vitamin D year-round?
Yes, pretty much. I found that over the years, when I do blood levels on people who live in Ontario, I find the majority of them are vitamin D deficient. They're well below the reference range of where they should be. And part of that is the fact that they don't get the sun exposure. The other part is that when they do get sun exposure, they put all that sunscreen on, and so they just don't manufacture as much as they should.
So why is it, I mean, I just recently had my physical, and you have to pay for the vitamin D blood test now in Ontario. Why is that? If it's such an important vitamin for us to have or know what our levels are?
Well, it's really a financial concern, and the thing is that when all this information about vitamin D came into the mainstream, most of the doctors jumped on the bandwagon and started to test for vitamin D. And as a result of that, the cost of doing that kind of testing was astronomical. And so the Ontario government and Medicare basically decided that the only people we'll do this test for are people with osteoporosis, osteopenia, renal disease or rickets, and people with certain metabolic disorders or malabsorption syndromes. So those are the only ones that can get vitamin D testing covered by OHIP. Virtually everybody else who's fairly healthy cannot get that testing without having to pay for it.
Right. And it's like $35 or something like that.
Yeah,
it's not,
it varies.
It's not a lot. It's not really a lot if you want to know where you are with your vitamin D.
I think it's a good idea. If you're going to supplement vitamin D, it's probably a good idea to get your blood tested.
Right. And how do you know if you, well, I know from your blood test, that's how you would know to take vitamin D, but should everyone take vitamin D?
I think if you're at high risk, especially if you live fairly north of the border, north of the equator, then it's probably a good idea. You should be supplementing with some.
And how much vitamin D should one take?
Well, in Canada, in Ontario, in the Toronto area, I found over the years that in the summertime, probably around 5,000 units a day, and in the winter, around 10,000. And I've done a lot of testing over the years on people, and I found that that's pretty much the number that will work for most people.
Wow, because on the bottle, I mean, once I read your article, I ran out to the store and bought vitamin D3, and it said to take 1,000 units a day.
I think 1,000 units a day will do virtually nothing for your blood levels. According to the research that's done by Dr. Wheat at the University of Toronto, he says that you don't move the vitamin D levels up unless you take a minimum of 4,000 units. And most people living here in Toronto in the wintertime, they need at least 10,000.
Now, is it something that you should gradually build yourself up to 10,000? I mean, you don't want to just take a bottle of vitamin D and take 10 pills at once, do you? Or?
Well, vitamin D is far safer than we've thought in the past. There used to be this paranoia about taking more than 1,000 units, but I think that's been dispelled by all the research. So I think it's fairly safe for people to start off with 5,000, 10,000, provided they know what their blood levels are, you know, and they're working with the doctor. It shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah. And how long does it take to rectify your blood after you start taking vitamin D?
Well, that's highly variable. There are some people that don't absorb it very well, and there are other people that absorb it very quickly and are able to correct the levels within weeks. But I've seen some people where it's taken like 6 months or a year before they got the levels up high enough.
Yeah.
One of the things that I would advise people to do is to use an emulsified form. For example, this one is an emulsified form of vitamin D, as are the capsules, which means that it's a fat-soluble vitamin in a water-soluble form. And the absorption rates of these are virtually 100%.
Okay.
So even people that are elderly, people that have digestive disorders, or people that genetically are prone not to be able to absorb vitamin D are able to do so with these kind of supplements.
Okay, and you can just get them at the drugstore?
Any health food store will carry them, and many drugstores do carry them, yes.
Yeah. And now, where else can we get vitamin D? Can we get it from food? Can we get it from
we can get it from foods. We can get it from fish and seafood. Fish oils, for example, are a primary source. Everybody's heard of cod liver oil. That's one of the sources. It's a very inexpensive source of vitamin D. You can get it, believe it or not, from mushrooms. You can get it from kelp and seaweed. Many foods are now fortified with vitamin D. For example, soy products are. Many of the health food stores carry supplements that are contained inside foods. So, for example, cereals and various, rice milk, almond milk, and those kind of things are all fortified these days. So I think we can get it from our diets, but you'd have to consume a large amount of those kind of foods to get it. So.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Well, thank you. This has been very interesting, just knowing what benefits do you see?
Well, the biggest benefit that I've seen over the years has been in flu prevention and infection control. I've had people come in and tell me that since they started on vitamin D, they no longer get the flu. They don't get recurrent bladder infections. They don't get recurrent throat infections, ear infections, chest infections. All those things are significantly limited. Well, vitamin D seems to work best if you take it with what's called omega-3 fatty acids. They come from fish oil. And so maybe a teaspoon or a tablespoon of some kind of fish oil, omega-3 essential fatty acids would be a good idea, because that keeps vitamin D in the system longer and prevents it from being broken down, so it actually makes vitamin D work better.
Well, thank you for being on and sharing with us your wisdom about vitamin D, and I know it's going to help a lot of people, so I really appreciate that. Thank you.
My pleasure.